ELA Ignite. I'm with Karen today, and we're going to be talking about her book, The Perfect Story: How to Tell Stories That Inform, Influence, and Inspire. Now, I set the title of this podcast. I normally ask the people that come on, and I decided to call it Storytelling for the Masses, because that was the feeling that I got when I read this book. Okay, so Karen, where can people find you?
My website is the easiest place, which is my name, KarenEber.com, and all of that's there. And I'm delighted that that was your experience, because it is for the masses.
Yeah, so I've read a lot of books on storytelling, and I know that when I got a lovely inscription inside mine, because when I met you, this is the second time you've been on my podcast, and the first time after we went off, we stopped going live. I said you need to write a book, and that probably was 2 years ago or something.
I think it was 4 years ago, and I think your exact words were, "Why is this not a book? Why don't you have a book already?" And that so motivating. Thank you for that.
Oh, right, okay, thank you. And so my first question is, why do we need another book on storytelling?
Yeah, and my response to you is we don't. And I didn't want to write another book on storytelling because there are so many. They touch on so many different things, but I felt like there are some that touch on the science in storytelling. As we get smarter about the brain, it's important to understand. But there wasn't anything that talked about, what do you do with that science? How do you incorporate those things in the story and think about it in a meaningful way? You know, just hearing that the brain has the ability to light up in the same pattern as the storytellers is interesting. This idea of neural coupling is interesting, but like, what the heck do you do with it? I felt like there was this opportunity to share the science and new science in a different way, help people understand what you then consider to put in your stories to make sure the brain is really engaged. And then, of course, take you through, how do you find ideas, define your audience, all that, avoid manipulating, tell stories with data. And so there are some things that are similar to other books. You can't have a book about storytelling and not offer a structure and some ideas. But I really wanted the reader to come away understanding why it's not enough to tell a story. The way you tell one makes a difference.
So tell us a story. Give us an example.
Okay. Is there anyone in mind that you read from the book?
Well, yeah, that you tell two stories. The one is that there's a story about Maria, isn't there?
Yes. Okay, sure. Happy to tell that. So Maria was a coworker of mine who was walking into the office for a really busy day. Her arms were full with her phone, papers, lunch. And as she stepped in the elevator and went to press the button, her phone fell right out of her hand, bounced on the elevator floor, and went right in between that little opening between the elevator cart and the floor. Here's it hit the basement 3 stories below, and is standing in the doorway trying to figure out what to do as the door is closing on her, because she realizes it's not just her phone. It's her driver's license, her badge, her credit cards. Like, her whole life is in this thing that is now unreachable. She can't go up to her office. She can't go to her car. So she goes to the front desk to talk to the security guard, Ray. And as soon as he sees her, he starts smiling, because most people walk by and do the polite nod, but never speak to him. But Maria is this person that knows your birthday and your last vacation and your favorite meal. And it's not because she's obsessive and stalks you. It's because she genuinely cares about people and wants them to feel seen and recognized. She tells Ray what happens, and that smile goes away, because he tells her it's going to be really expensive, about $500 US, to be able to get the phone back. They have to put in a service call, shut down the whole building, climb in the basement. She tells him, please just get a quote. If it's under $250, go ahead and do it. At this moment, I'm walking through the lobby and I see her, and I'm able to take her up to her office with my badge. And we're not there even 5 minutes before the phone rings, and it's Ray. He said, I was looking at the inspection certificate in the elevator. It's ready for its annual inspection next month. I can call that in today. We'll be able to get your phone back for free. It won't cost you anything. Same day this happens, I'm reading an article in the New York Times about Walt Benninger, who is the CEO of Charles Schwab. He was describing his last exam in university, straight A average in business school, going into the exam expecting to ace it. They all get in the exam hall, sit down, they get the paper, and the exam professor says, okay, go ahead, turn your paper over, and it's blank. Everyone's looking around confused at each other. And he says, I have taught you everything there is to know about business except this one thing, this most important thing. What is the name of the person that cleans this room? And he failed the exam. He had seen her, but he never spoke to her. He never met her. And he made a personal vow that day to always know the Dotties in his life. Her name was Dottie. And both Walt and Maria recognized the power of a leader helping people feel seen regardless of their role.
There you go.
There you go.
And they are beautiful stories, and in the book it's lovely how you then break them down, and this is where the tension is, which is the phone goes down through and we all sit there and go, oh my God, if that happened to me.
The number of people who have told me that they now hold their phones tighter when they walk into elevators. Also, amusingly, that is how most people end up on my website. So I see people all over the world this happens to, and they Google on a friend's phone, clearly, how do I retrieve my phone? And they end up on my website because of that story.
Just to bring in the comment from Adam Gray, he says brilliant.
Thank you, Adam.
And so how? We've had another comment as well. That story gave me goosebumps.
Right? That's what a really good story will do. Part of our experience is that we have a neurological response to story. So when you get goosebumps, you're experiencing that feel-good moment. You are getting this flood of usually oxytocin, some dopamine that is just allowing for you to feel like you're a part of that story or experience. Same thing happens when you're watching maybe a horror film or even James Bond Run Across Rooftops, and you feel your pulse quicken, even though you're not moving, you're getting some cortisol in there. And good stories can leave us changed where we feel like we're a part of this experience, even if it's never happened to us, which is super cool in business and in life, because now we're all going to think about who are those Dotties that I need to know, and maybe make that effort to introduce ourselves. And the same thing can happen whether you're selling a product or trying to raise awareness for a cause. A good story lets people have that experience and think about it when they encounter it again.
So to talk us through the construction of that story and how you went about, or how does that get us to create those goosebumps?
So there's many different factors that go into it, but there are these things called what I call the 5 factory settings of the brain, which is the way your brain is going to naturally respond to information or communication. It's how we interact with information or don't, and they then become choices you can make in your story. So one that I just mentioned, that you are experiencing these goosebumps or the discomfort, that is one of them, that we have these. We, at our most simple level, we seek pleasure and avoid pain. And so we will undergo these stories, and you have this choice of, am I telling an uncomfortable story, like dropping my phone down an elevator shaft? Am I telling a feel-good story, or both? Another is thinking about, what is that experience we want the audience to have? So think about when you walk into a networking event and you don't know anybody, and your brain almost automatically, subconsciously starts scanning the room and thinking like, no. You're trying to figure out who to go talk to. That's because we seek out in groups and out groups. In groups are those that are like us, or we share some value or something that we aspire to. In sales, this is that I'll have what she's having moment. So in a story, you have a choice to think about, am I trying to create an in-group moment where the audience either feels a part of something or wants to be a part of something, like I do want to know the Dotties in my life? Or am I trying to create a moment where people notice their differences as the out group, which is what charities do when they are helping tell the story of someone that lost their home due to a natural disaster and they're struggling to get food and electricity and plumbing, and you're sitting indoors with all of that and you recognize how different you are. This becomes a choice. Are you trying to have someone feel a part of something and belong to something, or notice their difference in the story? And then there's 3 others that kind of work in tandem, which get to, you want the brain to spend calories on your story. Those days when you come home from work or you finish a day of work and you are exhausted and you put on your favorite show or movie that you've seen so many times because you don't want to think, that's because your brain is feeling lazy. It doesn't want to put the effort out. And it's the same thing that's happening when we're in a meeting and we drift off. Our brain's goal is to keep you alive and to distribute calories to keep the body running. Some are non-negotiable. You have systems like breathing that it always wants to have calories for. But then it has this bonus fund that goes to things like attention and focus and whether it wants to pay attention to a story. And so part of your goal is, how do I put in details or unexpected events that's going to make the brain lean forward? As soon as you hear Maria drops her phone down the elevator shaft, you were like, oh, because you imagine that. Your brain puts you there and you visualize it. And it's already saying, like, we're going to spend calories on this because we want to see what happens. Along with that, the brain is always making assumptions. So these assumptions are not just for, are we in danger? It's assumptions for and predictions for, like, how am I setting my foot when I walk downstairs? The faster it makes assumptions and predictions and figures things out, the faster it can conserve calories, which is always the goal. But what this means in stories is we are trying to guess what someone's going to say, trying to guess the outcome of the book or the movie. When you hear Maria drops her phone, you think, like, does she get it back? When you hear Walt is asked, what is the name of the person that cleans this room? You have 2 thoughts. 1, did he know it? And 2, would I know it? So with assumptions, you either want to lean into them, like, I know you're going to have those thoughts and I want you to have them. That's why I tell the story the way I do. Or sometimes you want to disrupt them by putting in unexpected details that are different from what people know. And the last factory setting is that we have this library of files of experiences. This is our long-term memory. So as we take in information through our senses, they get stamped with emotion and stored in long-term memory. When you smell the fragrance of a loved one, you immediately go back to that day. It's because of this. But this is true for all our experiences. So when you're telling a story, you want to put things in that are going to help people think about their own experiences and connect to them. We all have cell phones and live with them and need them. And so hearing someone having a cell phone drop immediately makes you feel what that would be like. Or you hear someone walking into an exam room with the straight A's, and you probably picture a room that you've had an exam in. These 5 factory settings of the brain is lazy, it's going to make assumptions and predictions, it's got this library of files, it sorts in and out groups, and that it seeks pleasure and avoid pain. These become different considerations for what are choices you're making in your story to invite the brain in.
And what can we do to actually tell better stories? Because most of us are pretty rubbish at it.
First is that it's not starting with the story or your favorite idea or the anecdote you want to tell. It's really starting with your audience. Who are you talking to and why are you telling them something? So anytime you're asked to speak, your first question shouldn't be, what do I have to say? Your first question should be, what do I want my audience to know? What do I want them to feel internally? Because we are all making decisions through emotions, moving through life with emotions. And so a story has some feeling that you want people to experience, but it also usually has something you want them to know or do different. So you want to get grounded on, what is it I want my audience to know, think, feel, or do? You want to consider what's their mindset today around that and what might be an obstacle. For that story, I use that in my TED Talk. It's the opening story, and I gave that at Purdue University. So I had actually 2 major considerations for audience. One were the students in the audience I was giving the talk to. The other were people that were going to see the talk online in business. You have to give a good talk live in the room for it to translate on video. And so I had to really work through, what is it I want these students in the room to know, think, feel, do, which was understanding that storytelling and data are going to bring so much meaning. It's not either or, that stories are so critical to engage the brain as a leader, especially with data. And their mindset is they don't see that demonstrated. They have professors that lecture at them. They have endless amounts of data and moments where their brain goes lazy. And the obstacle is because they haven't seen a role model, they might struggle with having the courage to try it. Very similar considerations for the business person, right? So same challenges of, we are often in data-driven companies and we have all this data we're trying to figure out. Not really seeing a lot of people do this well. That's an obstacle. And so how do you start to move them through this? And so I started there, because when you're clear on your audience, you can then craft the story in the way to help shape what is going to move them and what you want them to experience as an outcome. When you just start with your idea and you talk at people, it's no different than the relative at the holiday table that is just telling the story over and over again for his own preference, and you almost don't need to be there.
And anybody watching, if you're watching on LinkedIn, the Karen's TED Talk link is in the well, it was one of the first comments, and it will also be in the show notes on YouTube if you're watching this at a later date. So Karen, you tell a story, don't you, about you were working with a CEO, and you turned up, and he was going to do the 150 slide presentation, and you turned that around. So talk us through what you did there.
Yeah, it's very common where we know that we have data that we want to share, and we feel like the more data, the more credible, but more is more. And in this case, the CEO did show up. He had a 45-minute presentation. I think he had over 50 slides. Many of them were the same slides he had shared the year before, which clearly didn't have an impact. And so what we did is put them aside, because the worst thing we can do when it's time to present is open all of our slide decks and start picking, well, I can use this one and this one and this one and this one. Because now we're not focused at all on the audience. We're just pulling together what we have.
Yep.
Most people spend all this time putting together presentations and making them look pretty, and maybe 5 minutes on what they want to say. Flip that. Start first with, what is it you're trying to do? In this case, the CEO was trying to get the company to embrace moving towards cloud technology. They were very comfortable in what they were doing, but they needed to make some pivots and make some changes. And we figured out a story that he shared about his family that laid out where his son had been struggling in a sport, and how he had to really start to pay attention to the coaches and get into it and be open to trying something different. This person was really comfortable sharing the story about his children. And so we put it together. He shared that story and then transitioned it to the idea, which is, we can't stay where we are. We need to look at different things. And here's what that's going to look like. And I think we ended up using maybe 2 or 3 slides. It worked so well because he told this story that made all the employees feel more empathy towards him. They developed trust towards him because they had an increase in the oxytocin, and they connected to it more strongly, because when you are presenting with data, sometimes it's easier to tell a story that has nothing to do with the data, but connects to the same takeaway that you want, because people aren't having mental protests about the data. They're following the story. It connects to the emotions and they move. So just like you are figuring out your audience and what you want them to do, you want to start there before you ever determine slides and visuals that you're going to use to support it.
That's great advice. We've got a comment, a question here. How important is tone, inflection, and word usage in storytelling? Good question.
It's going to add to your story, but storytelling is definitely 2 parts. You can't out deliver a bad story. If you haven't put together a story that is taking your audience into account and really thinking through what you want to know, think, feel, or do, you can't make up for that in your delivery. There's, it'll be interesting, but there's just no substance. So part 1 is figure out what it is. Part 2 is you do bring that to life. There's not a perfect set of, your inflection must be this, your pause must be this, your gestures must be this. It's going to be different for all of us. When you are getting up to the major points, it's helpful to accelerate your cadence a little bit. You often get a little bit louder. But then when you're getting to the point you want to land, you pause. It's going to let the audience's brain catch up. Don't ruin it by saying, let me say that again. Just pause, because the brain will hear the pause and say, wait, they're not talking. And it'll really resonate. So choices around how you're delivering it can add to the story, but it's not going to make up for a story that you didn't put any prep into.
I think it was Miles Davis who said something, wasn't it? That the gaps between the notes are just as important as the notes, or something like that. I probably butchered what he said, but and I think pauses are so important, and because people find that pauses very scary, but actually they're so, as I'm slowing down, they're so important.
When you are practicing your stories, you're going to find pause very empowering. I like to think of pause as a character in the story. I give that pause space, and I'm very intentional about where I invite pause. For me, it's usually after major points or ideas I want to land. I want that audience to catch up. So you'll notice when I told the story about Walt, I asked the question, what is the name of the person that cleaned this room? And then I pause, because I want you to think, would I know? And did he know? I want to give space for that. That was very intentional.
So a couple of comments. Hi from Los Angeles, and just some feedback saying that they love your response. Karen, thank you so much for coming on and talking about storytelling. I nearly forgot your book. Where, if I wanted to buy your book, where could I buy it from?
Everywhere books are sold.
So Amazon.com or something like that. It's The Perfect Story: How to Tell Stories Through Inform, Influence, Inspire. I've read it, and it's an excellent. If you want to know about storytelling, it's a really, really good book. Because it's you can, when you read it, and now you've heard Karen's voice, it's written in that style. So if you like the way that Karen talks, you can hear her talking. Because I've met Karen before, I could hear, she basically, as you read it, she basically speaks it to you. It's fantastic.
If you want to hear me talking, there's an audiobook version too.
There's
but
an
yes,
as well. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Karen,
Thank you so
Karen,
much.
if we want to find you, it's where do we go?
Yeah, my name, KarenEbeer.com, and there's information on the book there too.
Fantastic. And I've sold your book.
Thank you. Wonderful. It is good for fiction authors. The question is it good for fiction authors? So yes, it's not meant to help you write a screenplay or to write your personal novel. However, I've had several people that write fiction say they got a lot of different ideas on how to pull in different attributes into the story to make it be really compelling.
Highly recommended Karen's TED Talk, which prompted me to follow her on LinkedIn. When her book came out, I bought it too. Excellent all round. There we go.
Thank you.
Your fan club, Karen.
Thank you.
Karen, thank you so much for coming on.